بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. اللهم افتح لنا حكمتك وانشر علينا رحمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. وصل اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الكرام ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا وإنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. So, in terms of I want you all to really understand that, like I said, you cannot learn this subject in the amount of time that we have. You can't. But what you can do, hopefully you understand what it is. We went over the 10 mabadi, and I think most of you hopefully got a good grasp of the first act of the mind, which is understanding, and a general grasp of the second act of the mind. The third act of the mind is it's a little trickier, but it's important. When you the thing about the qadaya, the whole purpose of the qadaya was for you to understand that there are basically simple and compound propositions. The simple propositions, which are categorical propositions, are four types. You have A, E, I, and O. That's it. Those are the four. You have a universal positive, a universal negative, a particular positive, and a particular negative. That's it. That's called A, E, I, and O. And that's useful if you learn how to use the square of opposition. It's very useful because the most important from that is what are called contradictions. Because if you want to prove the opposite, if you want to prove something's true or not true, then you look at what the contradiction is. So if somebody says for you that all doctors are quacks, the way you prove that that's not true is not by proving that all doctors, which is the contrariety. It's not proving the E, because that's all doctors are quacks is an A. So you can't disprove that by an E statement, right? You can't say no doctors are quacks, right? Because in those type statements, both could be false. Whereas if one of them's true, the other is false. But both could be false. All Muslims are terrorists. No Muslims are terrorists. See, either one is true, then the other has to be false. Or both are false. In that case, obviously, both are false, right? But with the contradiction, which is the A to the O, or the E to the I, on this square of opposition, because these are called oppositions in logic. The contradiction is what you want to prove. So if I say all doctors are quacks, all you have to prove is some doctors are not quacks. That's all you have to prove. And once you prove that, you've disproven the A. Because in that case, A and an O, or an E and an I, one of them has to be true. Whereas in the others, it's not true. They could both, the A and the E could be both false, and the I and the O could be both true. All right? So that's a very useful tool to remember, because you can quickly assess where you want to go. If somebody makes a general statement, then you want to go to that, the contradiction, if you want to disprove it. So that's why that's useful. And then in terms of the compound propositions, you have the if-then, which is very important because we use that all the time. Right? We use if-then statements a lot. And if-then statements have problems because you can, if it rains, then it will be wet outside. All right? Now, one of the common fallacies that people do is they go to the affirming the consequent. And so they say something like, oh, it's wet outside, therefore it rained. That doesn't follow in that if it rained, it's wet outside. It has to be it rained, therefore it's wet outside. You see, you can only affirm the antecedent in that one. You can't affirm the consequent. So it's important to know when you reason what type of a compound syllogism, because really a compound syllogism actually has the proposition if then has two propositions, but they're molded into one. That's why it's compound. So it's really saying, it's really saying that when it rains, right, then whenever it rains, it gets wet outside. Or it is raining, it is wet outside. Like you've got two, so if then. And then you have the either or, which is, the either or is when you do like either a number is even or odd. That is what they call inclusive and exclusive, which means it's mutually exclusive and it's exhaustive, because it has to be one or the other. And the reason you want to know whether it's mutually exclusive or exhaustive is because you can have situations where it would appear that it's exhaustive, but it's not. And that happens a lot in reasoning, where people make mistakes because they think that the statement is exhaustive, but it's not. And that comes up, it's a very common mistake. And then finally you have the both and, or not both and, which is also a disjunctive. So when he says, and then he talks about the luzumiyya and the ittifaqiyya, and the reason for that is just to know that something doesn't necessarily follow even though it's in one of these type of constructs. So, you can say that, if he's the king of England, then I'm the king of France. That doesn't follow from, people use these constructs, and you have to recognize whether it's a luzumiyya or ittifaqiyya when they're saying it, because if it follows, then there's a logical proof there, right? But if it doesn't, it just happens to be a coincidence. So if we say that, if the grass is green, then the mountains are high. I mean, both can be true, but there's no logical conclusion to be derived from the fact that the grass is green, except in propositional logic, where they actually do say that those are true statements. But in this type of logic, they're not. So then he says, وَالْمُنْفَصِلَةُ إِمَّا حَقِيقِيَّةٌ كَقَوْلِنَا الْعَدَدِ إِمَّا زَوْجٌ. So we did that. And that's like to say, like, so زَيْدٌ إِمَّا أَن يَكُونَ فِي الْبَحْرِ وَإِمَّا أَلَّا يَغْرَقْ. What's important to know is that, it could be mutually exclusive. Either he's there or he's there. But it doesn't exhaust it, because he could be in the ocean and not drowning. He could be swimming. So that's important to know when something is mutually exclusive and when it's exhaustive, or when it's just one or the other. وَقَدْ تَكُونَ الْمُنْفَصِلَاتُ ذَوَاتِ أَجْزَاءٍ ثَلَاثَةٍ. We did that. And then the contradiction, I did that with you. هو اختراف القضيتين بالإيجاب والسلب بحيث يقتضي لذات أن تكون إحداهما صادقة والأخرى كاذبة، كقولنا زيد كاتب، زيد ليس بكاتب، ولا يتحقق ذلك إلا بعد اتفاقهما في الموضوع والمحمود. So they have to be in agreement in subject and predicate. You have to be talking about the same subject and the same predicate. If I'm talking about different subject or different predicate, then it doesn't fall into that opposition. والزمان والمكان, and that's earlier logic, but modern later term logic didn't include those because it kind of goes on ad infinitum. فنقيض الموجب الكلية إنما هو السالب الجزئية. So the contradiction hence the contradiction of an affirmative universal proposition is a negative particular proposition. Like our statement, every human is a creature. Some humans are not creatures. Okay, so one of them has to be true. Right? So if you wanted to disprove some humans are not creatures, if somebody was making that case, then you would do it by proving that every human is a creature or an animal. It should be animal. وبعض الإنسان ليس بحيوان ونقيض السالب الكلية إنما هو الموجب الجزئية كقولنا لا شيء من الإنسان بحيوان بعض الإنسان حيوان. And also a negative sentence, an E sentence, its contradiction is an I sentence. All right? والمحصورتان لا يتحقق التناقض بينهما إلا بعد اختلافهما في الكمية لأن الكليتين قد تكذبان كقولنا كل إنسان كاتب ولا شيء من الإنسان بكاتب والجزئيتين قد تصدقان كقولنا بعض الإنسان كاتب بعض الإنسان ليس بكاتب. So two determinate propositions with quantifiers cannot be mutually contradictory unless they differ in quantity. For two universal propositions could both be false, like our statement. So that's where the A and the E, they could both be false. They're not like the contradictions. So these are the contrarieties. These would be called contrarieties. Now conversion, you have two types of inference. When we get into the syllogisms, I'll talk about this more, the istidlal. Maritain, who I like a lot, argues that there isn't any immediate inference. He says that it's all it is asserting the same thing from a different direction. It's not, you're not inferring some knowledge that you didn't know. But in traditional logic, generally, they say that that you can have a type of inference that's immediate. It's not mediated. Syllogistic reasoning, analogical reasoning, conditional reasoning, all of those are reasonings that are mediated through discursive thought. You have to go through a process to arrive at the conclusion. Immediate inference is knowing if I say that no men are angels, you immediately know no angels are men, right? Because remember, an E statement can be converted. So an E can be converted. And an I can be converted, like some. But you can't convert an A, generally. You can't convert an A. So an A can only be converted to an I statement. So that's what conversion acts is, just taking the subject and turning it into the predicate. So وهو أن يصير الموضوع محمولا والمحمول موضوعا مع بقاء الإيجاب والسلب بحاله والتصديق والتكذيب بحاله. So you leave the ijab and the salb and the tasdiq and the takdhib. It is for the subject to become a predicate and the predicate a subject while retaining its original negation or affirmation and truthfulness or falsehood. والموجبة الكلية لا تنعكس كلية. So if it's a universal positive statement, it doesn't convert. إذ يصدق قولنا كل إنسان حيوان ولم يصدق كل حيوان إنسان. So you can say every human being is an animal, but you can't say every animal is a human being, right? And this is because A sentences are distributed in the subject, undistributed in the predicate. Remember we did distribution? Do you guys remember that? Distribution is the extension. Remember we have comprehension and extension. So when you have comprehension, you understand what the thing is. When you have extension, you understand what it applies to. And one of the major flaws in reasoning is confusing these two, or there's a fallacy of the undistributed middle where people will take all men are animals, no brutes are men, therefore no, all brutes are animals. No, all men are animals, no brutes are men, therefore no brutes are animals. Okay, so the middle term is always the middle. We're almost to syllogism, so I'll wait till we get there. But that's a problem when you do that, because what you're doing is you're taking something that's distributed, right, or undistributed, and you're distributing it. So in the first statement, all men are animals, because it's an A statement, the first is all men. That's distributed. It extends to all men. But are animals? Animals is undistributed. Because it doesn't mean all animals. Only some animals are men, right? Because an A can go to an I, right? So, you got that? A little bit. Show you. You have to get your mind around these concepts. So it takes a little while. But, what I'm hoping, like I said, is this is going to stimulate you to want to study this more in depth. Because I think it's a really important science. It's a science that that our tradition is rooted in. Like our tradition was very committed to this science. And it's also of great benefit when you study Islamic studies in more depth. And I've been using the Qawaid as an example because this is what he's doing. He's using these principles. So, والموجبة الجزئية أيضا تنعكس جزئية بهذه الحجة. So you can take a positive I and you can make it, you can convert it, right? والسالب الكلية تنعكس سالب كلية. And you can take a E statement and it'll convert also. So no men are angels, no angels are men. All right, so an E converts, but an A doesn't convert, right? An I converts also. So likewise, an affirmative particular proposition, mujiba juz'iyya, converts to a particular juz'iyya by this proof, and a negative universal proposition converts to a negative universal. This is evident in and of itself, since if no human is a stone, it is true, then our statement, no stone is a human, is true. All right? And then finally, وَالسَّارِبَةُ الْجُزْئِيَّةُ لَا عَكْسَ لَهَا لُزُومًا لأنه يصدق قولنا بعض الحيوان ليس بإنسان ولا يصدق عكسه. So a negative particular proposition has no necessary converse. For indeed some creatures are not human is true, while its conversion, some humans are not creatures, is not true. So sometimes that'll work, sometimes it won't. All right. So that's the basic. Just if you get that, it's important when we go into the next phase to just understand. You have 4 categorical statements. Universal positive, universal negative, particular positive, and particular negative. A, E, I, and O. The Arabs called it, they call it, kaf sin and jim sin. Like they have kulliya sariba, kulliya mujiba. So they go kaf mim, kaf sin, and then Jim, Mim, Jin, Sin. So that's how they do the A, E, I, and O for people that want the Arabic. So now we go into syllogism. All right, so here's where it gets very interesting. Syllogism is a tool. It's a tool that uses deductive reasoning. If you look at the way humans reason, we have 3 basic ways that we reason. We reason through induction, deduction, and analogy. In Arabic, it's called istiqra, which is induction, istintaj, which is deduction, and tamthil, which is analogy. technical terms, in logic, istiqra is induction, qiyas is deduction. So the syllogism is called qiyas. And then in fiqh, qiyas means analogy. So when you read fiqh books, when they say qiyas, it means analogy, analogical reasoning. So kullu muskirin haram, every intoxicant is haram. Beer is an intoxicant, therefore beer is haram. All right, so wine is haram, beer is like wine, therefore beer has the same ruling as wine, all right, by analogy, because it intoxicates. That's the illa and mushtaraka bainahuma. The legal rationale between the two is intoxication, iskar. And our ulama differentiated between muskirat, mufsidat, and murqidat. So they had a very subtle awareness of drugs, and they put them in a different category of muskir, and they still considered it haram by extension. So when we reason, we're doing one of these three things. Now, in Western tradition, one of the great masters of reasoning was Socrates. And Aristotle was a student of Plato. Plato was a student of Socrates. Aristotle was in the academy for about 20 years with Plato. And then he wrote his book on his Organon, which is his 6 books on logic. And from that, Ibn Sina wrote his Shifa by extending that. But the methodology that Socrates used was very powerful. How many people have read The Republic? Wow. They used to be kind of mandatory reading, I think, in school. Anyway, if you come to Zaytuna, you have to read it. So, in The Republic, it's 10 books, and the subject of The Republic is justice. And there's a character that Socrates interfaces with called Thrasymachus, and he's a sophist. Now, sophists, they use reasoning, but they use fallacious reasoning, so that's why they're called sophists. They use sophistry. And Thrasymachus, they're talking about political justice, and Thrasymachus makes the argument that political justice is just the powerful doing what they will. That's political justice. There's a lot of people today that would argue that same point, that there's no real justice in the world, it's just power. That's all we have out there is power. Well, Socrates has a methodology. And so the first methodology begins with questioning, to ask a question. What is justice? What is political justice? That opens up the possibility for knowledge. And the Prophet ﷺ said, "As-su'al miftahul ilm." Questioning is the key to knowledge. So knowledge begins with questioning. What do children first do when they're little? All they do is that. They don't give you any answers. That comes later. Wait till they get to the teens. Then they give you answers. But when they're little, they want to know. They want to know why. Why is that? Why is the sky blue? Right? And unfortunately, a lot of us don't know those answers, but they're answers usually to all those questions. And what we tend to do to children is just like, it just because it is, right? And that kills the spirit of inquiry. And school does that after the parents as well. So by the time they're 15 or 16, they're very cynical. And that's why Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya told me once that there's 2 types of humans that live in constant wonder. Philosophers and children. Right? Everybody else, they just stop asking those questions. So, but then what Socrates will do is he will begin to look at particulars. And this is his use of induction. So he will actually precede his deduction with induction. And really that is the basis of knowledge. And it's a modern argument that denies deductive knowledge. In other words, arguing from universals to particulars as opposed to particulars to general assumptions or conclusions. So in the case of justice, Socrates will actually, okay, if somebody says political justice is power, right? It's just power, then it's just the powerful acting out their will. And you wanted to prove that that wasn't true. So the E statement is going to be that political justice is not the powerful acting out their will. It's something else, right? So what he does is he then asks, he starts to give these examples. And he says, what's the essence of a just doctor? What does a just doctor do? You're a doctor. If a doctor's just, what's he doing? Right. And what's the patient, really? When we look at the patient, what is he? He's sick, right? And what does that mean? He needs help. So who needs help? What type of people need help? Huh? Weak people, right? Yeah, weak people need help. So a just doctor is somebody who's in a more powerful situation helping a weak person. So that's a just doctor, right? And then he'll ask like other things. So what's if you want to train somebody in archery and you're a just teacher, so what are you doing in archery if you train the student? What's the student? He knows less, right? That's why he's there asking you for help. And so he's in a compromised situation. So his knowledge is weaker than your knowledge. So you're trying to strengthen his knowledge. So here's a more powerful trying to empower a weaker person. And he goes through a series of these things showing how basically, what we call just is actually the powerful helping the weak. It's not the weak help. It's not the powerful doing what they will. It's the powerful helping the weak. So a just carpenter takes an incomplete thing, which is his materials, which is a weaker situation, and makes it a complete thing, the house or the whatever it is, right? So he's going from weaker to stronger, right? So he's making the weak strong. And a just, anything, if you look. So then from that, Socrates argues that we can then see that justice is the more powerful helping the weaker do something, right? If it's political justice, you're helping the weak redress the wrongs that have been done to them, right? Because they're in a compromised situation, like a sick person. So if somebody oppresses another person, they're sick. And then he says, so what we can extrapolate from that is that there's something in the nature of justice that necessitates the powerful helping the weak. So he's getting at something essential, and that's where he gets his universal. So he's abstracting from these particulars something universal about the nature of justice. And from that universal, he can then apply it to particulars. And that's basically his methodology. And it's a very powerful methodology, and you can see it. The Prophet ﷺ has used this often in hadith. You'll see him ask a question, and then he'll give these examples, and then he'll give the general rule, and then he'll apply it to the particular. So when we move into reasoning, what we're doing is we're learning tools that enable us to better do what we do naturally and do constantly, which is to reason, to make arguments. Everybody, why do you want to go to that university? Well, because my friends are going there. So how's that going to be beneficial? Because I'm going to feel more comfortable, I won't feel alienated. People are making arguments all the time. And they're either good arguments or they're bad arguments, right? So what this learning how syllogisms work is learning basically how to determine whether an argument is sound or not. And it's very, very, it's hard to determine a proposition. all right? Propositions are harder to determine their truthfulness from their falseness, right? Because a proposition is either true or false, right? A term is either clear or unclear, and a syllogism is either valid or invalid. So that's how it works. So what he says is al-qiyas, and here he means syllogism, because qiyas can mean different things. هو قول ملفوظ أو معقول مؤلف من أقوال متى سلمت لازم عنها لذاتها قول آخر. So it is a verbally uttered or mentally comprehended inference composed of statements, i.e. propositions, that if conceded in and of themselves necessarily give rise to a third statement, the conclusion. So what that means is that if I have an argument, then I have these, I'm putting together propositions, and I'm taking two known propositions, and then I'm concluding from those two known something that was unknown before that. And basically what this is doing, it's based on some really simple principles, and the foundation of syllogism is based on these principles. The first one is the law of all or nothing. So when you have a universal statement, if I make a statement, all men are mortal, then that statement applies to every individual in the extension of that term that I comprehend, right? And if I say the opposite, again, then if I say no angels are men, that applies across the board. So these are the two first rules, the omnia and the nullo, right? And then you have this is one of Euclid's common notions, right? Which is, it exists in geometry, it exists in logic as well, but this is very important. So two things that are equal to a third thing are equal to each other. All right, that's a common notion. So if A is equal to B, and B is equal to C, then B is equal to A, right? You got that? It's a common notion. That, in a syllogism, is what's called the middle term. That's that third thing. So what you're doing with the middle term, you always have to have a middle term, only one in a syllogism. So when I say, like, all men are created equal, all men are mortal, this is the one they always use in all the logic books. All men are mortal, even the Arab used it. All men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. So what is the middle term there? It's men, right? Because it's repeated twice. The middle term is always repeated twice. It has to be repeated in both. It has to be repeated in the minor premise. You have the major premise, the minor premise, and the conclusion. The middle term has to be. And that's what it's equal to. So all men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. So men is the middle term, and what's equal to that is the mortality and Socrates. All right? That's the basic idea behind. And then the three laws. The law of identity, a thing is what it is. So when we say Socrates, we're not saying something else. We mean Socrates. When we say men, we mean men. We don't mean birds. So a thing has to refer to itself. And then the law of non-contradiction. Right? So A can't be not A, which is a take on the law of identity. And then the law of the excluded middle. These are the three. So that's the foundation of syllogism right there. The law of all or nothing, and then the common notion that things equal to the same thing are equal to themselves, and then these concepts of the law of the law of identity, law of non-contradiction, and then the law of the excluded middle, which basically just says a thing cannot be both A and not A, right? It can't. It's an excluded middle there. So that's the basis of how this syllogism works. Now, Imam al-Ghazali wrote a very intriguing book called Qistas al-Mustaqim. And in that book, he proves that there is a just scales. Zino bil-Qistas al-Mustaqim. Weigh with the true scales. وَوَضَعَ الْمِيزَانَ أَلَّا تَطْغَوْا فِي الْمِيزَانِ. We gave you scales that you wouldn't transgress the scales. Right? So this is what he's saying. The scale is this ability to reason. He's saying that God gave us these scales in order for us to be able to know truth from falsehood. And he argues that the prophets teach this. He says he learned it in the Quran. Ibn Taymiyyah said he actually learned it from Ibn Sina. But I think even if he first learned it from Ibn Sina, then he saw it in the Quran, and it was from the prophets that he learned it at a deeper level. So I don't think they're mutually exclusive, those two statements. So then he says, وَهُوَ إِمَّا إِقْتِرَانِ كَقَوْلِنَا كُلُّ جِسْمٍ مُؤَلَّفٍ وَكُلُّ مُؤَلَّفٍ مُحْدَثٍ وَكُلُّ جِسْمٍ مُحْدَثٍ وإما استثنائي كقولنا إن كانت الشمس طالعة فالنهار موجود لكن الشمس طالعة فالنهار موجود وكقولنا إن كانت الشمس طالعة فالنهار موجود لكن النهار ليس بموجود فالشمس ليست بطالعة. So it is verbally uttered or mentally comprehended inference composed of statements, propositions that if conceded in and of themselves necessarily give rise to a third statement, the conclusion. It is either by coupling, and this is actually a categorical, because there's categorical syllogisms. Like our statement, every physical body is composed, and every composed thing is originated, hence every physical body is originated. And that's why you could also say every physical body is composed, right? And every composed thing is originated, hence every physical body is originated, composed of accidents, right? So it has to be muhdath. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala he's not composite. It's one of his realities, because something that's composite by nature is created. And then the conditional, he calls it exclusion. The conditional is if the sun has risen, then daylight is present. And indeed, the sun has risen, hence daylight is present. Or like our statement, if the sun has risen, then daylight is present. However, daylight is not present, hence the sun has not risen. والمكرر بين مقدمتي القياس يسمى حدا أوسط وموضوع المطلوب يسمى حدا أصغر ومحموله يسمى حدا أكبر والمقدمة التي فيها الأصغر تسمى الصغرى والمقدمة التي فيها الأكبر تسمى كبرى وهيئة التأليف من الصغرى والكبرى تسمى شكلا. So the statement that is repeated within the two proposition is called the middle term. That's the one you want to identify. So when you see an argument, most arguments are in the form of what are called enthymemes, which are, they're missing one of the propositions, usually the minor. So when you're learning this, what it enables you to do is to take an argument that's obviously not, this is an artificial language, right? The syllogism. You have to understand that. People say, nobody talks like that, if the sun is out, then then it's daytime, right? People don't talk like that. But the point of this is, in the same way of reducing fractions, right? You take, if you have a fraction like 6/12, you can reduce that down to 1/2, right? If you understand what 6 is to 12, you'll understand what 1 is to 2, right? It's a ratio. What that does, it facilitates, you want to reduce fractions because it makes it easier to add, subtract, divide, multiply fractions, right? So it's something that you do in order to facilitate. The same thing that you're doing with this science is you're putting them into these simplified forms because you can evaluate the validity of the argument. And there are really fixed rules for this that will tell you very quickly whether it's a sound or an unsound argument. And in that way, it's an incredibly useful tool. And somebody who obviously, if you have a very high level of natural intelligence, some people can do this without having to learn the rules. And that's what Ibn Taymiyyah said. Logic is superfluous for very smart people, and it's a waste of time for dullards. Right? But that's a fallacy there, right? What's the fallacy? Huh? It's not, yeah, well, exactly the extension. Like he's saying, therefore it's a waste of time. No, not everybody is really smart, and not everybody's really stupid. It doesn't extend to the whole of humanity. Most of us are somewhere in the middle, and that's where logic is really beneficial, right? And it just so happened that the Prophet ﷺ had so many brilliant people, not all of them, some of them, Ya Arid al-Qafa. You know, the one of Sahaba, he went out with the 2 strings, you know, trying to work out, like, because the Quran says, until you can see the difference between the white and the black thread. But it meant like on the horizon. So it was like metaphorical. Didn't mean literally. But he went out with the thing and he's trying to work out, you know, with looking at the 2 strings. And the Prophet said, Ya Arid al-Qafa, you know, like, because the Arabs had a belief, you know, that it's like phrenology. Like if you have a flat back on your head, it means you're not very smart. So he was basically saying, you know, come on, wise up. Don't take it literally. You know? So not everybody gets things immediately. So the subject of the conclusion is called the minor term, and the predicate is called the major term. So when you get to so if you look, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates, minor term, is mortal, major term. All right? So those are important to know. That's it. Because you only have 3 terms. That's a law of the syllogism. You can only have 3 terms in any syllogism. Only 3. And having a 4th term is a fallacy. The fallacy of the 4th term, the fallacy of amphiboly, ambiguity. It's an ambiguous term. So I'll give you an example. If I say all power corrupts, a universal statement, right? All power corrupts. Knowledge is power. Francis Bacon said that, right? Knowledge is power. Therefore, knowledge corrupts. All knowledge is, all power corrupts. That's what Lord Acton said. All power corrupts. Knowledge is power. Therefore, power corrupts. What's that? Therefore, knowledge corrupts, yeah. So what is that valid by reasoning? What's that? What's that? Yeah, so that's a fallacy of 4th term because actually, wait, knowledge isn't. All power corrupts, right? Knowledge is power, therefore knowledge corrupts. So what's the middle term? Power, right? That's a middle term. So how many terms do we have in the syllogism? We have knowledge, power, and corrupts. Those are the 3 terms. So a syllogism is valid if its terms are unambiguous, they're clear, right? They have to be this, right? Each one has to mean the same thing each time it's used. The premises are true. So do you accept the first premise? Power corrupts? Generally. I mean, it's generally true, right? Power corrupts. Do you accept the second premise? Knowledge is power? Okay. So the premises are true, right? So the conclusion, if the terms are clear, the premises are true, the conclusion has to be true. So knowledge corrupts. What's that? Yeah, it's power is the fourth term. Because in the first one, what type of power is he talking about? No, but what type of power corrupts? Political power, right? So he's talking about when people get into political power, it has this corrosive quality on the soul of the individual. So power corrupts. In the second one, knowledge is power. What type of power is he talking about? So he's really talking about the power that science enables us to do things, which arguably that type can be corrosive as well. But they're two different types, so you'd have to make a different syllogism do you see? They're two different types of power. They're not the same types of power. And that's why they're not, you have a fourth term there. You don't have three terms. And the law, you always have to have three terms. The syllogisms can only have three propositions, right? I mean, these are laws that let's see. Okay. I think I'm going to be able to finish this, inshallah. I'm hoping. Any questions? Any answers? Is the Socratic method inductive or deductive? Well, he uses both, but the syllogism is generally a deductive. It's a deductive approach, but you need some level of inductive reasoning enables you to arrive at deductive truths, right? Because you abstract the nature through the particulars. When you see the particulars, you grasp the nature. And the abstraction is what enables you to come to a universal, right? So in that way, they're both necessary. Skeptics will deny that you can go beyond the first. You know, in the Socratic method, the first is questions. He asks questions. Skeptics deny you can go beyond that. They'll say that you can't. In fact, there was a skeptic at the time of Aristotle who said that based on the law of identity, you can't say clouds are white. Because clouds are either clouds and white is either white, but clouds can't be white. So this is one of the skeptics. So what's the problem with that? I mean, how would you respond to that skeptic? Yeah, good. That's good. So if you understand the five predicables, you'll understand why that is not a problem. Because you're predicating whiteness on something that's a substance, right? Yeah. So the cloud is a substance, but it has accidents that are not, they're not necessary. Like a cloud could be black. It's accidental. So it's not denying its nature, or it's not a contradiction in that way. But I mean, the skeptics, they're an interesting bunch. And then empiricists will not go beyond induction. An empiricist will say you can't really get a universal from all these particulars. These are nominalists. And the problem today, most, if you're in academia, in science or anything like that, what you're dealing with metaphysically is nominalists. Most people are nominalists metaphysically, and we're not. We're essentialists. We believe in essences. Whether those essences, like Ibn Arabi argues, whether they're real and they have a real existence, a'yan thabita, or whether they have wujud dhihni, that's a debate amongst the ulama. But they're in agreement that there are essences. And then, so they're nominalists metaphysically, they're atheists theologically. They tend to be. So these are the assumptions that they have. They're atheists theologically. And then they're materialists, right? In terms of their view, anthropologically. They're just the way they deal with humans. This is what Krefft argues, and I think it's accurate. And they're empiricists by their epistemology, so they don't believe in rationalism. And if you're interested in this topic, there's an incredible book. It's probably one of the most interesting books on this subject. If you're a doctor, a physician, called Divided Legacy by Harris Coulter. It's 3 volumes, but if you want this problem, it's all articulated in the first volume. But it's an amazing book that argues that there have been 2 forms of medicine, and they've been in an antagonistic relationship throughout history, which is empirical medicine and rational medicine. Chinese medicine is rational, which doesn't mean that it doesn't have an empirical aspect, but it's rational in that it has a theory, and then it applies that theory to the particulars. So, if you go see Dr. Yang, and he takes your pulse, he's going to say your lung qi is weak. Or he looks at your tongue, and because of the color of your tongue, he discerns that you have too much heat. That's a rational medicine because he's using empirical signs, but he has a rational theory of why those things, why the tongue is dark as opposed to light. Because a healthy tongue should be very pink, light pink, generally. Obviously that's not for all, because certain groups of people you have to take into consideration. Different groups, but generally that's true, and you'll see that with children too. And then they should be moist, and you have too much heat, they tend to get dry. So that's a rational approach to medicine. Homeopathy is a rational medicine. There's a theory behind it. Whereas in allopathic medicine, it's purely empirical. There's no real theories behind asthma. You just treat it, the symptoms. They can give you, that this person has atopic, they have certain reactive airway disease, or they have, they'll have causation. They'll talk about causation, but they don't have real theories about why these things happen, why they come about. And that also, when you get into looking at logic, you have to discern what types of because that you're using. Is it a causative, logical, psychological? People use those in different ways. And so they can give you a cause and effect type of because, but they can't really give you a logical because in medicine, allopathic. Any other questions?
Unfortunately, we're out of time for questions.
Okay, fortunately for me.
Unfortunately for us.
Barakallah fiki. Please don't, this is really to expose you to something. I'm really hoping you got that first section on understanding. I hope you have the general idea behind the propositions. When we get into the syllogisms, I hope you get a general understanding of what it is. It'll familiarize you with a certain way of doing things, but I don't want you to, I'm not getting any of this, I'm not, it takes time and work. There's a book by a Confucius teacher called Knowledge Painfully Acquired. People tend to forget that knowledge takes work, that it's not just, I'm not getting it. Well, you have to work at it. And the harder you work at it, the easier it gets. And some people get things much quicker, but that's not necessarily a good thing. My teachers, my Mauritanian teachers always said that people that get things really quick usually lose them quick. Whereas people that it takes time, they usually have a better grasp of them once they get them. So, Allah gives to whom He pleases. And my advice to the students, they asked me to give some advice to the students over at the madrasa here in Konya. I told them, some of you guys are going to be really fast, and some of you are going to be slow. the fast ones stay humble and don't have contempt for the slow ones, and the slow ones stay optimistic and don't have envy for the fast ones, because the fast one now might later be slow, and the slow one now might later be fast, right? Because Allah is Al-Fattah. Imam al-Taftazani, they thought he was like an idiot in the madrasa. They used to make fun of him. Man, did he show them. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك